when Keir Starmer first walked into Downing Street,
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace.
he declared that the fight for trust is the battle that defines our political era. It was a timely declaration, and as it turned out, a prophetic one. You cannot win that fight while remaining dependent on the very donors that help put you in power.
There is an inevitable ecosystem between the wealthy and the powerful.
There's an argument that rich people should be able to do whatever they want with their money, and that it's somehow a curtailment of their free speech to stop them doing that. And at the end of the day, we have to remember, who are the losers in this? And it's us, ordinary people.
People can see that politicians are no longer acting in their interests.
Behind every major donation is somebody with their own interests and their own agenda. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Whose interests do our politicians actually represent? Duncan, so when we talk about some of these big donors, is there a common thread across big donors? Is there something that unites all of these people?
What they have in common is the dependency relationship that the politicians develop, that it's quicker and easier for them to amass campaign war chests by taking large amounts of money from a small number of donors than trying to build support from many people willing to give a donation. And those donors understand that. I mean, they're not idiots, right? And you often hear them talk about their expectations of a political party that they're giving money to.
I guess what you're seeing as well, you mentioned Christopher Harborne, it's a huge amount of money to reform. I guess, why do they do it? Why do you think these small number of wealthy individuals want to bankroll our politics?
One of the problems with trying to understand why Christopher Harborne donates is that he has an incredibly low profile. But what is clear is that he does have a particular worldview. And what is particularly interesting with Nigel Farage is that he's really backing a sort of liberalisation of crypto rules in the UK. When obviously earlier this year we discovered that there was an undeclared £5 million gift that had been made just before the general election in 2024.
And I cannot even tell you how grateful I am to Christopher Harborne.
Suddenly the timelines shift as to why Reform might be quite so interested in bringing about a sort of more liberal regulatory system for crypto.
These aren't isolated scandals. They're symptoms of a political culture in which access and influence are unevenly distributed, and where those with money have learned exactly how to navigate a system with too few limits on what they give and too little transparency on what they get in return. The question isn't just about whether individual politicians have acted wrongly, it's whether the system itself is working as democracy requires. What does this all do to trust in British politics? What does this rise in big money? What do voters think about it?
Lots of people obviously feel like things aren't working for them at the moment. And there are lots of reasons for that.
People are hearing more of these stories about money in politics, big money in politics. They're seeing that the sorts of things that they want, that would make their lives easier, aren't happening.
But they conclude that politics isn't working for them either.
And yet they are seeing that the rich don't have to pay their taxes. The rich are awarded all kinds of special statuses and loopholes. And they do very much question who politicians are there for.
In a democracy, politics is meant to be serving the public interest, not narrow interests of particular groups or particular sections of society.
Yeah, so in my academic work and the sorts of things that I've taught, we've really looked into this idea of policy congruence. Policy congruence is basically how much a policy is aligning with different parts of the population. And the recent evidence from Oxfam that showed that if the rich support a policy, it has a 45% chance of happening. If they oppose it, has only an 18% chance of happening.
And I guess what you see, I'm really struck, you see more and more opinion polls showing that the proportion of British voters who want to see things like caps and political donations and who worry about funding politics seems to be increasing as well.
Transparency International has some new polling in which over 80% of people said that they thought that politicians were serving the interests of their donors. The Fairness Foundation last year had a similar poll, and YouGov have a tracker, so we can see year on year how there is growing public support for a cap on donations. And in their latest polling from December of last year, over 60% of people said that they wanted to see donations capped at £50,000 a year or less, if not banned outright.
A political system financially dependent on a small number of very wealthy people will always struggle to act against their own interests. As long as politicians believe their next election campaign depends on donor money, they'll always struggle to bite the hand that feeds them. But the UK is not the first country to confront this problem, and others have found ways through it. The question is whether there is the political will to try. And I guess the question then is, around political finance is a bit like with the laws, like, why has it been so difficult, do you think, to do something about this?
It's the $1 million question, but the bottom line is that if you're in power as a government, you want to stay in power.
The people that decide it, the politicians, have a conflict of interest.
And your eye is on how to win the next election most of the time.
Almost every politician that I've talked to about this, instinctively, like a reflex reaction, assesses a reform proposal through the lens of what impact is this going to have on me and my party and our campaigning.
It seems to me though as well that the idea that this is something that's going to be very difficult to do is very deeply ingrained in a lot of politicians. There's a kind of sense that donors we know have lobbied against reform of political finance. You might say, well, they wouldn't they? But in one level, it does feel like it shows there's a power of vested interest in this as well. I've seen this
at work. 15 years ago, I was sat at a cabinet office table where this policy reform was discussed. It was an intensely political discussion. The independent, objective civil servants working on this policy brief were not driving that discussion. It was led by politicians. There were a lot of politicians sat around the table, and not just elected politicians, but even people from their party headquarters brought into the government department for a discussion about where this policy reform could go. And that's illustrative of how there is a capture of the self-interest of a political party in how this policy area is addressed.
And so do you think that's where you've got all these different interests? People understand how the system works for them at the moment. And there's this wariness actually about changing a system that even if they think it's broken in their heart of hearts, they still know how to make it work.
So of course what happens, the party that is in control of the government has just won an election. And so the system as it exists at the time has served them. It has put them into power. So they suddenly have a renewed confidence that maybe it ain't so bad. That's why we often see opposition parties support reform in our politics, and parties in government lose interest very quickly.
Political parties are focused on how to win the next election. But that's the wrong question. What should keep them up at night is how to maintain the public confidence needed to actually govern. The money trap is real, but it's a trap of political choice, not structural necessity. And that means it can be broken.